This is Molly, and I'm coming to you live from Project Oceanology with Kyle. He's going to wave and say hi.
See if I can turn that camera around. Hey, everybody.
We're here today at Project O to talk to you about fish form and function. So we're lucky enough to have 6 different types of fish with us here in the lab. And we want to talk in particular about how the bodies of these fish, how their forms are related to what they do for a living, how they function. And so there's 3 different specific types of things we're going to be focused on today. And if you have the worksheet that is posted somewhere with this video, feel free to follow along on that, or just get a pencil and a sheet of paper. So the types of form we're going to really focus on today are the shape of the body of the fish. And fishes can be all different shapes. They can be compressiform, which means flat side to side. Think like Dory from Finding Nemo. Depressiform, which is a flat fish. Cteniform, which means ribbon-like. Globiform, which means round. And fusiform, which means torpedo-shaped. So my first challenge for you is to try to think about how different shapes of fish might affect how they live. For example, how does the shape of the fish affect maybe how fast it can swim, or where it's able to go, or where it likes to be. The next major feature we're going to talk about is the tail, or the caudal fin shape. Also a lot of variability. They can be round, they can be straight in the back, they can be forked, or they can be what we call lunate, which is like an extreme sort of fork. Again, how do you think that affects the ability of the fish to swim? The final feature we're going to focus on is the mouth of a fish, sort of the business end for eating. And there's a couple different features we can talk about. So first, where is that mouth? Is it located at the very end of the fish? Does it face upward? Does it face downward? Does it have teeth in it? And finally, we're going to be talking about feeding type. Are they more ram feeders? Are they more suction feeders? And we're going to go over what that means. Now that we've given you a very quick overview, we're going to go to the fish. And then as we go through it, we'll review this at the end, so don't worry if you didn't get it all. Let's start looking at actual fish, and then you can see what some of these things mean. As I'm looking at the fish today, I'm going to take some notes, and I think you should take some notes too, and try and see if you agree with me. So I've got my little chart here for the 2 fish I'm going to start with, the Fluke and the Windowpane, and I've written body, tail, and mouth as my categories. If you're just joining us, again, this is Molly and Kyle from Project O, and we are focused on fish form and function. So we're going to get up close and personal with a bunch of the Project O fish and talk about how their body shapes affect what they do. All right, so the first fish we have for you today is one of our most awesome ones. It is called the summer flounder, or the Fluke. As you can see, it's a very flat fish. And so what body shape would that be? Is it depressiform, compressiform, ribbon-like, round, torpedo shape? If you said depressiform or flatfish type, you are right. And you can kind of see as I lift this fish up in the water see how these fins here undulate as it swims. So I'm going to hold it up so you can really see how flattened it is. You're getting a really good look at the mouth. Did everyone see that? We'll get back to that. Okay, so we're going to write depressiform, or flat, for the body shape. Now let's look at the tail. So I challenge you to think about what different tail shapes meant for speed. Let's look at this. So our possible tail shapes were rounded, straight, forked, or lunate. Let's take a look at this tail here. What do you think? I would say this tail is pretty rounded. So we'll write that down. Did anyone have any ideas about what, for example, having a rounded tail as opposed to a forked one might mean for how well the fish is able to swim? All right, the final thing we're going to look at is the mouth. And so we got a good look at the mouth just a little while ago, and we saw that this Fluke had teeth. We'll see if it gives you another view. Everyone see that? This is a very wiggly fish, so it's not holding still. There, oh, look at that. So there are some teeth in there. The other thing you might notice, we talked about whether the fish has teeth. We talked about the position of the mouth. Is it at the very end of the fish? Is it facing up or facing down? And that's a tricky question with something like a flatfish, because they're actually flattened side to side and then they lie on their side. I would say that this mouth, I'll back it up. I would say that this mouth is pretty terminal. It's at the very end. Let's compare it to a different flatfish we had, and then we'll talk a little bit about function. So I'm going to call that mouth terminal.
We have some people guessing that the function of that rounded tail might indicate that it's not very fast.
Oh, okay.
Also, maybe that it's more powerful than it is fast.
Okay, that is a really good guess. And it turns out that a fish like this doesn't have to swim super long distances, but it does need to be powerful. And so the fluke in particular is a sit and wait predator. So it lies on the bottom and it has to burst up and catch prey that come by. And so it needs to be able to grab them with its jaws. So it needs a burst of power, but you're right. It doesn't need to sustain that for very long. And that rounded tail shape does give it a lot of drag. And so it takes a lot of energy for this fish to swim fast. Much different from some of the other fish we're going to see. All right, let's take a look at our other flatfish. This, I'll take one of these out. This is a different kind of flatfish. This is called a windowpane. And one thing you might notice right away is that the whole body is much more rounded, isn't it? It's still flattened side to side, so we're still going to call this a depressiform fish. Let's look at the tail. So we'll see, we might spread it out a little bit. What do you guys think? Rounded, straight, forked, lunate, something else? If you guess rounded, I think I agree with you. That's pretty rounded. And now let's look at the mouth. And so let's look at it just from above. Do you have a good view, Kyle?
Yeah.
Looking from above? Okay. And so, as for the fluke, the mouth of this one is on the terminal end of the fish. But here, let me show you something different. So if we look inside, we don't really see big teeth, but here's what we do see. Look how that mouth can open. Did you catch that? See how much that opened? So one big difference between these two fish is that the windowpane flounder is more of a suction feeder. The fluke is more of a ram feeder. So let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. I'm going to dry my hands off. And you can look up some videos on this on the internet as well. I'm going to show you some high-speed videos on my laptop here. Let's see if we can get close up. So this is a video of a bluegill sunfish. This is a suction feeder. You got it in view? All right, so watch what happens. So as it approaches the fish, just like that windowpane, it opens its jaw, and that creates a big suction. If you've ever tried to do that at a beach, where you sort of move your arms back and something moves towards you, that can be a good way to retrieve, say, a beach ball. But now let's compare that to this barracuda, which is a ram feeder. And so a suction feeder sort of sucks water in to catch its prey. A ram feeder, like the barracuda, essentially runs at its prey and just gets it by darting through the water and taking it. Isn't that cool? So the barracuda doesn't have nearly as much suction, but has a lot of power. So think about suction versus ram feed. And now a lot of fish fall along a continuum, right? So some fish do mostly suction, some fish do mostly ram, some fish do a combination. So that's another thing we're going to think about as we go through this. So one really cool difference between the fluke and the windowpane is that the fluke that we looked at first is lying on the bottom, waiting for prey, and then bursting out and catching them. The windowpane is much more chasing things down and then sucking them in. And so you can really tell a lot about what these fish do by looking at their form. So if I finish filling out my chart, sorry, this is a little messy, but the tail is also rounded. The mouth is terminal, but it's more of a ram feeder. This mouth is terminal, but it's more of a suction feeder. Okay, so those are our flatfish. They had a very similar body shape and a lot of similarities in their ecology. Now let's move on to some different types of fish. So I'm going to hand things over to Kyle. We're going to switch the camera over, and then he's going to tell you about some of our next fish.
All right, so pardon the awkward handoff. We're going to try and get this oriented properly as well because it was going sideways.
All right.
Can you let us know if...
It says we can't turn our phone while recording.
Oh, okay. Well, then I guess we can hold it sideways if everyone's still kind of looking at us like this. But I'm going to come around this side here.
Okay.
And I want to start out talking about our compressiform fish. So we'll start out with this. This is called a scup. Some of you might also know it as a porgy. That's a common name for all the different species in this family of fish, but this one is called a scup. And if you're looking at it, you can see it's not flattened down to the bottom like the flatfish we had with that depressiform body, but rather it looks more flat sideways or laterally. That means it has a compressiform body shape, and that's better for swimming around in the water column rather than laying flat down on the bottom. So if we want to talk a little bit more about how this animal moves around, you can see that it is a lot more mobile than the flatfish were. We can take a look at its tail. So now that it's kind of flayed out open, you can see that it is kind of straight, but there is a little bit of concavity in there. So it has a slight fork to its tail. Now a straight tail is going to have less drag than a rounded tail. So that's better for sustained fast movement. It's also better for this fish to be more agile. And that's good for this animal because they like to swim around in schools. So they can kind of stay tight together in their school and maintain a sort of social formation. So if they're under attack by a group of larger fish, these fish can kind of dart around really quickly and they're really agile and maneuverable. So that straightened tail is a little bit better for maneuverability and a little bit more efficient for swimming longer distances and faster.
So, shout out to Hazel who's watching, who actually has watched a bunch of feeding videos like that. Callie is watching, Marissa, Mamie is watching, Brandy. Brandy thinks that this is noticing how big this fish is. Marissa wants to know, how big do they get?
So scup, on average, you'll find them about this size. This is their normal schooling size, but they can actually live for about 20 years, and they grow pretty slowly, but they can get about 20 inches or so. So they can get a lot bigger than this, but most of the ones that we see around here are about this size. This is a good average size for them.
Matt and Joe are watching. Special shout out to any teachers and students who might be watching this. So give us a shout out, and we'll try to call out your school as you log in.
All right, so we talked a little bit about its body shape and the tail. Next, I want to talk about its mouth as well. So you notice its mouth is terminal. It's at the end of the body. It is it's not facing up, so we know it's not superior. It's more kind of straight at the end of the fish or kind of facing downwards. So where do you think this animal likes to get its food? Do you think it's swimming up at the top, or do you think it's swimming in the middle, or what do you think?
Ooh, good question, Kyle.
Do you think it has a big mouth that's good for suction feeding, or do you see any large teeth in there for catching big prey?
We can see pretty well right into the end of it right now.
All right, so you may not be able to see any big substantial teeth like the Fluke had, but this fish does have a few different kinds of small teeth.
Malcolm, age 5, has a question. He would like to know why the fins look like they have spines.
So some of the fins on this fish do have spines, actually. If you notice the dorsal fin, the one on the back there, it has some pretty sharp-looking needles on the back there, and that is a good defense for this animal. The other ones that you may see, like they look like they have little lines going through, maybe not quite as sharp or quite as thick. Those are called rays. Those are structures that kind of help the fish fan out its fins and move them. But the ones on this dorsal fin do have spikes attached to them, so they're good for defense. They can kind of point them out. If there's a fish trying to eat it, that fish would get a mouthful of spikes and it wouldn't be too pleasant for that predator. So good question on that.
Shout out to the Tisco School in Brantford. Marine Science Magnet High School, Ashley is watching. Christopher from Sacred Heart in Groton. And we actually have somebody from the Nathan Hale Arts Magnet School, Iris, who goes to Groton Public Schools, and we have somebody watching from Oregon.
Awesome. So when we're talking about the form and the function of this fish, so we're not only talking about its tail or its body shape or its mouth. There are lots of other features of this fish that help it fill its niche. Basically, a niche is the role it plays in its ecological community, so how it interacts with different animals that live in the same environment. So one of those relationships might be predator and prey. So if a predator fish were to try and eat this one, it is morphologically adapted to try and defend itself against predation with those spikes. And also with that tail, letting it be really agile. It might be able to outmaneuver a really large fish that's really just going straight at it. It might be able to tuck into a small crevice or something like that. So good observations on that. I do want to move on to our next fish.
Oh boy, this is a really cool one.
And this isn't quite as common as the scup is, but it is another compressiform fish. You notice it has its laterally compressed body. I'm going to try not to move around too much in front of it because they can get scared easily and they can jump pretty high out of the water. So I want to keep this fish in the tank. You notice it has these really large eyes. Well, this is actually called a big eye. That's the name of this fish species.
I think from the front is a better view.
So,
it's getting a little scared of me. Oh, good view. There we go.
So those really big eyes help it see a lot of its environment. You see it's kind of looking upwards, and it's sort of making eye contact with me too. They have really great eyesight. They're visual predators. So that's basically how it's going to be getting its food. It moves slowly among coastal waters, and it's looking sort of upwards.
Oh, I got the camera kind of close. You can see how it got a little scared.
And
I'll
you
back
can see
off. Don't worry.
that straight tail is good for quick bursts of speed, but not really sustained movement. So it's not quite as agile as the scup was, but it does still have a nice straight caudal fin that helps it attain quick bursts of speed and a little maneuverability. So less drag than a rounded fin, but not quite as little drag as that forked fin. You notice its mouth is a little bit different than the scup. It is terminal, so it's at the end of the fish's body.
There we go.
But this animal has what we call superior mouth position, so it's kind of facing upwards towards the top of the body, whereas the scup had it sort of at the end or slightly downwards.
That's cool, Kyle, because all the other fish we've looked at so far had the terminal mouth, and so this is the first one that's been different.
Yeah, so this one is what we call superior. And why do you think it has that mouth positioned that way? If it has these big eyes looking upwards, that mouth facing upwards, how do you think it's going to be getting its food?
Ooh, good question. Let's let people stew on that.
Yeah, so while you're stewing on that, I will talk a little bit about the natural history of this animal. So I mentioned they're pretty uncommon around here. We only really see these animals when the water is warm. They'll come into the coastal waters, but they are more common down in the Caribbean and Florida, actually. So they are what we call a seasonal visitor to Long Island Sound, and they basically like to swim in shallow waters, kind of close down to the bottom and looking upwards. So did we have any guesses on how this animal's getting its food?
Heather guesses that maybe it swims up from below,
yes,
so that no one can see it coming.
That's a great guess, Heather. So yeah, this animal does like to sort of surprise its prey. It cruises in the shallows and uses suction feeding. So it has this big upwards facing mouth that opens it up and creates a downward suction to pull any shrimp or small fish right into its mouth.
Yeah, and we have somebody who does a lot of STEAM, like art science combo stuff from a school, and is noticing how aware this fish is of us.
Yeah, so you can see this fish seems very timid and it has great eyesight with those big old eyes. So it can detect predators swimming into its waters that might threaten it, but it can also use those big eyes to find prey. So it's kind of a multi-purpose morphological adaptation to have those really big upwards eyes. Okay. They can avoid predation and they can find their food really easily. So this fish is a little scared, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Who doesn't get quite as flighty. he doesn't care if, this one doesn't really care if I move around it too much. So here we have a northern puffer, and you notice this body shape is a lot different from the ones that we had before, right? It's not depressiform, so it's not laying flat on the bottom, and we can't really say it's compressiform either, because if you look on the sides, it's not really flattened in on the sides, it's actually round. So this is what we call a club-shaped body. It's sort of a combination of a bunch of different kinds of body types that we would talk about. And you can see how this animal likes to move. It's not using that caudal fin very much. Its caudal fin is kind of small and rounded, so it's good for maneuvering mostly, but it's actually using those pectoral fins, which are much longer and a little bit more muscular towards the front of its body to propel itself.
What's it doing with the side of the tank, Kyle?
So it's just trying to escape right now, I think. You can see it's trying to swim against there, but it's moving those pectoral fins a lot. And a good reason for that is due to the overall body shape of this animal. It's really round, but you can see that it has a very pronounced head. This is what we call sort of globiform. That means rounded body. And this club shape, if it was based on caudal action, it would be kind of heavy to push that big round head through the water. It's not very hydrodynamic. So I want to hear from you. Do you think this animal is really fast, or do you think it's really slow with this body shape?
Good question. Okay. We have a question from Graham and Grady.
Okay.
They want to know, is it going to puff up?
So we're going to try not to make it puff up, because they only puff up as a defense mechanism, usually when they're stressed out. But you can see on the belly, it kind of looks like it has a lot of loose skin. And actually, these animals can puff up just the way you're thinking. So they get spherical. They inflate themselves with either water or air. They have a special sac inside their belly that enables them to inflate like that. So if a predator were to come along and try and eat it, since it is really slow moving, it wouldn't be able to swim away very easily. If a predator tried to get its mouth around it, it would use that organ to inflate and become completely spherical. It also has really prickly skin that's kind of tough and rubbery and hard to get through. So it would kind of just bounce off the mouth of a would-be predator. Think about this, it would be really tricky to get your mouth around an animal that's spherical, or like almost the size of a softball, right? So that's one way it evades predation.
So we have a couple of guesses. You asked if people thought it would be a slow or a fast swimmer. We have one guess for slow, and then we have another guess that probably not super fast, but not super slow either. So they're trying to shoot the middle there. A little bit
in the middle there. So this animal is pretty slow moving. So they're big and heavy and bulky. They're propelled by their less powerful pectoral fins rather than their caudal fins. So this animal likes to just kind of browse around the shallows, cruising around eelgrass and algae mats, trying to find its prey. So when we're talking about how it gets its prey, we're going to take a look at its mouth. So does this look like a really big mouth that's great for suction feeding? Or does it have really big teeth that's good for biting and holding on to prey? Or what do you think? Let's see if we can get a good view. He's probably avoiding the camera.
Yeah, it's camera shy right now. We got some good views at the end earlier. It's looking at you, Kyle.
Yeah. So it may be
fish knows who feeds it.
Yeah. I know. I was mean this morning and put them all into tanks instead of feeding them when I walked up to them. So let them down. But
so shout out to anyone who joined us late. This is Molly and Kyle from Project O, and we're focused on fish form and function. So for each of these fish, we're talking about their body shape, their tail shape, and their mouth position and type of feeding. We will review it all at the end. And just a shout out, in a later session, you may get a chance to see some of the Project O fish getting fed. These ones that we have in the tanks today are a little too jumpy probably from being put in the tanks to eat calmly. So we're going to save that for another session when they're in their normal tanks.
Yeah. Right. So we were talking about its mouth before, and so you may have gotten a good view of it earlier in the video. But what did its teeth look like? Were they big and sharp like the Fluke? Or are they tiny like the Scup? Or did somebody else have another observation?
Well, Iris, who's 6, she thinks the puffer might suck its food.
Okay.
In its mouth.
So it might suck its food. So that's a good guess. It does have a little bit of that because it does have a pretty powerful tongue, so it can create some suction. But mainly, these are sort of picky eaters, not in that they only like to eat certain things, but rather they're browsing and picking at little morsels of food They don't really have to chase down. You know, they're not very fast, so they wouldn't make a good predator chasing down a little fish. They like to eat small periwinkles and crustaceans, things that don't move around a whole lot in the shallow water. And they don't have really big sharp teeth that are good for biting and holding on to squishy things like fish, but rather their teeth, they have 4 plate-like teeth that are fused together to form sort of a beak, and they use that to crack small exoskeletons and shells of their prey. All right, so let's move on to the last fish that we have to talk about here. And this is a completely different body form than we've seen so far, and it also comes in a small package here. So
here, you might be backlit there. Let's switch.
All right. Let's see here. All right, so the fish in this tank is actually hiding, and this is a good example of how its body shape helps it avoid predation. Okay, so first, let's see if you can get a chance to see where you can find this fish.
I'm going to take the bubbler out just briefly.
All right. So to get a better look at it, I'm actually just going to take its shelter away.
Oh.
So you can get a good look at it, and I'll put it back in afterwards so we can see it actually use its shelter. This is a rock gunnel. So the body shape is definitely not compressiform or depressiform, so it's not really flattened either way, but it's rather long and ribbon-like. So we call this taniform, which means ribbon-like. Some people may also call it anguilliform, which means eel-like. Slight differences between those, but basically the main point I want to make is that this fish has a very elongated body, and you notice it has long fins going down the entire length. They're pretty continuous. In fact, there's pretty much no space between the dorsal fin, which is on the back, the anal fin, which is on the bottom, and the caudal fin, which is that tiny little rounded fin at the very end. So they're all kind of connected, and that makes its long ribbon-like body act as a propulsionary mechanism, basically. So it uses its whole body to slither around like that, almost like a
view
snake.
Of the tail there. Yeah.
There you go.
We have somebody thinks it looks like an eel.
Yeah, it does look like an eel. So eels also have that elongated body form. And what do you think that's really good to help them do? I want to hear from you all. Why these animals might be shaped like that. What does that help them do?
Yeah, so what's the function of that body form? We have another question. We have a 12-year-old watcher who's asking, are any of these fish venomous?
So none of these fish are venomous. There are
Whoa, coming up to say hi. Hi there.
So some
trying
of
to
them
see the mouth there.
May look dangerous, like that scup with all those spines. Those spines are just pokey. They don't have any toxin in them or anything like that.
7-year-old wants to know what it says.
What it says, what noise it makes.
What noise it makes?
Probably not much of one. If you notice it, its little mouth doesn't have a whole lot of room to make a whole lot of noise with that. Maybe a small bubbling noise, if anything. But I did want to talk a little bit about its mouth. So we talked about its body shape, which is elongated. We talked about its tail, which is kind of continuous and rounded. So next I want to talk about its mouth. This one has its mouth positioned at the very end, so it is that terminal mouth part. And it doesn't really have any big teeth or anything like that. So kind of a small nibbling looking
it's
mouth.
wrapping itself around the shelter again.
Yeah, so that may give you a good idea of some of the benefits of having that long body. If some of you guess that it helps it hide, clearly it does.
So we've got some guesses. We have a couple folks thinking hide and get away fast. It could use its body to get into small places like teeny tiny cracks. That's Heather's guess.
Yeah.
Iris is thinking that the shape is for gliding.
Okay.
So lots of good ideas. Let me see if I can get another view of it from over here.
Yeah, so all of those are
now?
great guesses. It's very slender, very flexible, so it can help hide in small crevices and like this shell into tiny little spaces where other fish may not be able to fit. So that helps it hide from predators very well. It also helps it with its feeding. So this animal is kind of a lie-in-wait predator. So it just kind of hides in these small spaces, and when a prey animal happens to cruise by or walk by, it can just very quickly dart out and grab it. So say a small shrimp or crustacean was going by its burrow or its shell that it's hiding in, it can dart out very quickly, strike like a snake even, kind of wind itself up like an S shape and dart out very quickly and snatch its prey. So it's actually more ram feeding than suction feeding, but it just has a very tiny mouth with very, very tiny teeth.
Sucking tiny things.
Yes.
All right. So why don't we go back to our board and sort of do an overview of which fish fell into which categories? Does that sound like a good idea?
Sounds like a plan. All right.
All right, let's get you a different color.
Sure.
So it'll stand out.
All right, let's see if this red comes out.
All right, so again, this is Molly and Kyle, and we've been looking at body form and function for a bunch of different fish. Let's talk about body shape. So we had these initial shapes. Do we find any compressiform fish? Those are the ones that are flat side to side.
Yeah, so I believe we had a couple different examples of this. Anyone mentioning it in the comments?
Oh, I think there might be a bit of a delay.
All right, well then I'll just go ahead and write it. So the two that we saw here with the compressiform body would be the scup, or the porgy.
Yeah, scup are also called porgy, so you might have heard that term.
Yeah, common fishing term. It's used for basically any fish of that family. So the scup, sea bream, all sorts of other ones. So we had the scup, also the big eye.
Oh, yeah.
So the big eye had that compressiform body where it's kind of laterally flattened. Let's see. So depressiform, we had two examples of that as well. We had the windowpane flounder.
Oh, yep. Scup and big eye. We did get some delayed guesses. So go ahead and guess, and then we can give a shout out. So Debbie had it right.
All right, awesome. And the fluke. So these are both of our flatfish. So they are flattened down towards the bottom. That helps them stay flat on that benthic area in the sound.
Yeah. Brandy and Marissa both had that right.
All right.
Now, does anybody know whether we had a ribbon-like, a taniform fish? I'll give a shout out if anyone guesses it right, but you can go ahead and write it.
All right. So we had the rock gunnel.
Oh, the one we just looked at.
So that was the last fish we looked at. Had that long eel-like looking body. Globiform is rounded. So we may not have had fish that were specifically round all the time, but we did have some that were rounder than others.
I know. I think it's the pufferfish.
Yeah, that's that northern puffer.
Debbie and Callie correctly guessed rock gunnel.
All right. Very good.
And we didn't have any torpedo-shaped fish. And why is that, Kyle?
Well,
why don't we have
these fusiform fish, they are torpedo-shaped. They're very fast. So an example of these might be like a tuna fish or a mackerel. So these are fish that are cruising long distances in the open ocean, and they're also very fast. All the fish that we catch are usually on the slower end and also bottom dwellers, because we catch these using an otter trawl, which is a slow-moving net that kind of drags sort of through the bottom. So these fusiform fish, they can avoid a net pretty easily, so we don't catch them as often. They are around in Long Island Sound, but it's hard for us to get an example of one.
What about those tail shapes?
All right. So let's see if people can take some guesses on what we have for the tail-shaped.
All right. So let's start with rounded. What fish do we have that had a rounded tail? Go ahead and put your guesses for any category.
So for rounded, we'll start out. I guess we could put that rock gunnel on there. It was kind of a continuous rounded, almost came to a point. So we've got the rock gunnel. And any other guesses on there, just shout them out. Otherwise, I'll just start writing. So we had that windowpane flounder.
So these are all fish that would have a lot of drag from the shape of their tail, and so you wouldn't expect them to be long distance swimmers.
And the puffer.
And the puffer. Okay, so 4 of them had rounded. Yeah, so we have Heather, Callie, and Debbie are all making flounder guesses.
All right, yep, all the flounders.
Yep.
That northern puffer, even though it was small for the body shape, it is rounded at the end, and the rock gunnel.
So a straight tail, that would have a little less drag than a rounded one, right?
Yeah, actually, as we're looking at all these shapes here, as we go down the list, we're actually decreasing the drag. So the rounded shape has the most drag, which enables really strong, powerful bursts, but it's not energy efficient, so it's kind of hard to sustain. So these animals can make a quick escape from a predator or a quick chase down of nearby prey, but they're not going to be cruising around in the open water very easily. So a straighter tail reduces the drag, but still has enough surface area to allow for a lot of maneuverability. So a straighter tail is good for an agile fish.
Ooh, and we have a guest, Heather, who seems to know her fish.
Yeah.
Heather is remembering that we saw a straight tail on the big eye.
Yep. So the big eye has that straight tail. So it's good for what they're doing, making quick approaches on prey items or a quick escape from a predator, and slightly more maneuverable, so it can go in and out among rocky areas to find its food. Moving down towards the fork tail, we're decreasing the drag even more.
One fish left.
So we had one example of that one.
Marissa has a good guess. She guesses porgy.
Yeah, the porgy or the scup. Very good. So pretty similar to the big eye in that it has a lot of maneuverability, but that slight fork lets it cruise, maybe get a little bit faster and sustain that movement for longer. So these are good for schooling fish. The last one that we have, the lunate, just like the fusiform, we don't typically see animals with that sort of tail shape in Long Island Sound, or at least we don't catch them that easily, because these are more for long cruising and really fast animals. So animals that have to either travel a really long distance or they keep up high speeds for a long time. They need that low drag in order to keep that up.
All right, last category, the mouth.
So for mouth position, for the terminal animals, that can kind of be said for all of the fish that we saw today. They were all kind of sort of at the end of its face. There was nothing
so we could just
right
say
on top.
All.
Yeah, so we can say all of them.
Well,
but if we're looking at the other options here, the superior, inferior, we can make some better fits, I think. So superior, we really only had one animal with a superior facing upwards mouth. We had one with a kind of inferior, but not exactly on the bottom. So it was more terminal with slight inferiority.
What was the one with the superior mouth? No guesses yet, but I'll let you know if anyone gets it right.
All right. So for the superior, we had the big eye.
Yeah.
Remember those two big eyes and that mouth facing up, looking for its prey. So it can go up and make a suction feeding approach on any prey item that way. And really the only one with a slight inferiority would be the scup, which it did have a terminal mouth, but it was kind of at the bottom of its face, so it kind of has like a long
and that
face,
fish
sort of like that.
It was angling its body down too, which made it seem more like that.
So the big eye is kind of looking up, whereas the scup is kind of looking downwards. So that gives us an idea of what it's feeding on, right? So it has downward-facing mouth with a few different kinds of teeth. So it's a general browser. You can eat lots of different kinds of things down the bottom, and that's what we're looking at for the teeth. So the ones with present teeth, we had really sharp teeth for the fluke. We had the tetradont, which means four-tooth, which is the four plate-like teeth, kind of like in a beak. And that was the northern puffer. And we had the variable with the scup, because they had a few different kinds of teeth. The small conical incisors, good for biting and holding on a small fish, and the molars, which are good for kind of crushing small invertebrates as well. And for feeding type, ram versus suction, we have a couple under suction that we can get right away, right?
Windowpane.
Windowpane, we talked about that.
And a lot of these fish might do a bit of a combination of these two types of feeding.
Yeah, this is sort of a spectrum, but this just kind of helps us break it down or classify it a little bit easier. So we have the windowpane. The big eye definitely is doing some suction feeding with that big old upward-facing mouth. The Scup can do it a little bit, but it has those teeth as well. So it's kind of in the middle of that spectrum. For ram feeding, we definitely have the Fluke. We can say the Scup is kind of in the middle there, and the Gunnel. Even though it has little teeth, it is going to be a lion weight predator shooting out real quick to catch its food there. All right.
All right. So I hope you've enjoyed our section today on form and function of fish. So this has been Kyle, and I'll switch it. This is Molly. I wanted to mention that next week, Project O is going to be celebrating Earth Day all week. And so keep an eye out for our schedule. On Monday, we're going to be having a live Zoom session at 11 o'clock that you can look at on our Facebook page for details. You can learn about how to safely clean up an area in your community. And also there's an app that we're going to be using so we can all share our results. And Debbie is going to be teaching us how to use that app. On Tuesday, we're going to learn a little bit more about how debris in the watershed might affect the watershed. So tune in to Facebook Live at 9:30 a.m. for Callie and Debbie to learn about that. And then on Wednesday, which is Earth Day, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. every hour, a Project O educator is going to go live near their own home to talk about the watershed that they're in and do a little environmental cleanup. And so we're going to be doing it. We invite everyone out there to get out there and do that. So join us for that. And then we'll do some more Earth Day events on Thursday and Friday. So stay tuned for that. So for now, though, Molly and
Kyle.
Standing far apart for social distancing reasons. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.